Hey, pay close attention. Let's get it.
I had planned another closing message, but I feel compelled to say what I'm about to say. Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
The world they're bringing in is to be a world where everyone who is born, or would be allowed to be born to serve the state.
They seek to establish systems of government based on the regimentation of all human beings by a handful of individual rulers who seize power by force. Yes, these men and their hypnotized followers call this a new order. It is not new, and it is not order.
Collectivism is that concept where individuals are considered to be discardable, and that the group is more important, and that the state is the all-important unit of society, and citizens exist only to serve the state.
What if I told you the government has your baby's DNA, and in some states, that DNA is stored even without your consent?
You cannot expect to have a smoothly running world socialist system if you have people out there who are going to object.
These three words is how the government has been getting authority over us. Registration, application, submission. All of the power they have over you is because you have put your signature on a document with one or two or three of these words.
I was born free. And I'm free because I say I am, and not because the government give me a piece of paper.
But these are my sons. They don't belong to the state.
We have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
So the government will issue a driver's license, giving us permission. How does the government give us permission? We have rights. We give the government permission.
These three words is how the government has been getting authority over us. Registration, application, submission. All of the power they have over you is because you have put your signature on a document with one or two or three of these words. The word registration, what does it mean? I thought I'm just putting my name down. Nuh-uh. Historically, it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years to an act of a ship's captain signing over his ship and all chattel contents to the harbor master for safekeeping. Chattel contents included the slaves, the condemned, those in debt, anything that could be party to a contract essentially was considered chattel property. Application, when I found this one out, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm telling. Application. Application means to beg. To beg, plead, petition, implore, entreat, or request. I was like, beg? I started looking at the assumptions. If you want to look at a word and figure out what this word, what effect this word is going to have on your life, you need more than just the definitions. You need to look at the assumptions that this definition rests upon, and then you need to look at the implications created. The assumptions created by begging. He who begs knows exactly what they're begging for. Well, mind you, one time in Toronto, I had a woman ask me, can I have anything? But for the most part, someone's begging, they know exactly what they're begging for. They know exactly what they are willing to give up for it. They are acknowledging the authority to grant. Or if it doesn't exist, they're willing to create it through transference. If you beg me to take your shoe off and scratch your toe for you, maybe then I would have the authority to do that. Prior to you begging me to take your shoe off, I try touching your property, you can kick me in the teeth. We transfer authority if that authority doesn't already exist when we apply. And finally, because you are a human being and no one's ever obliged to beg, it's an entirely voluntary action. You can never claim, oh, they made me apply. No one has ever made you apply for anything. Submission. Submission is their other tricky little definition. It means to agree to bend to another's will or to leave to another's discretion. If you are agreeing to bend to someone's will, you are in contract with them. And again, in order for it to be voluntary or lawful, it has to be voluntary. If you are agreeing to leave something to someone's discretion, in order for you to legally leave something, you must have possession and ownership of it. And again, you're abandoning it, and that's an entirely voluntary action. They get all their power when you put your signature, which is evidence of an oath, on a document with the words registration, application, submission. They do it with everything. You want to register your kids? What are you going to do? You're submitting an application for registration. You want to register your vehicle with the motor vehicle branch? You're submitting application for registration. You want to register your real property? Submitting application for registration every time.
We're big on talking about how we can elect our leaders. But as Dick Gregory once said a long time ago, yes, we can elect our leaders, but you can't select your leaders. How many people have ever wondered, what does the word poll mean? Why do you have to go to the poll? It's like Gallup, the Gallup company, it's called the Gallup poll. Anytime some company is taking a poll, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they are electing anybody. You take a poll to get a consensus of what the people are thinking. That's what a poll is. It's called a Gallup poll. There are many other companies that conduct polls for universities, for government. So that's what a poll is to get a consensus of what the people are thinking. How many people like this color or this product as opposed to how many like the Pepsi as opposed to Coca-Cola as opposed to root beer? And so they take a poll. And so the poll shows that that the masses all particularly like one product. That's all they wanted to know. Just which one do you like best? It doesn't mean much of anything. It's just a poll. All 6 of them work for the company. They work for the government. Period. But which one do you particularly like? Because this way, if you particularly like one and you vote for him, then we will make him the president of the company, and you will be happy because it was your choice. No, it wasn't your choice. You didn't have the opportunity to select your leader. You only had the opportunity to elect one of the 6 that they gave you, and all 6 worked for the same company.
And they've even written about it. There's a fellow by the name of Carroll Quigley, who's a former history professor at Georgetown University. And he wrote several books about this group of people and their origins and their roots coming from Europe and England in particular. And he comes to a very interesting point in one of his books where he says, okay, this is the way the real world is. He said, how is it that we collectivists, we elitists, how can we rule the world when at the same time we want to let the average person think that they're living in a, quote, democracy. They're living in a system where their vote counts. They're living in this world in which they feel that they must participate in their own political destiny. This is a carefully nurtured myth that they want to create, so people will be content with no matter what happens to them, they'll say, well, I voted for it, or I did it. This government is my government. No matter how bad it is, it's responsible to me. And as long as people have that image, then they don't complain so much about how bad it gets because they did it, they think. So Quigley deals with this question, how do you let people think that they're directing their own political destiny when at the same time we, the elite, we are the ones who must direct their political destiny without them knowing it. How do you do that? And he answers the question brilliantly. He said, it's very simple. You've got to have 2 major political parties, and they'll both have the same major goals, the same basic fundamental principles, and they'll argue with each other, on the surface with slogans and leadership and style and all of that sort of thing. He said, but we will control them both. There's the strategy. There's the whole scam behind this left-right paradigm. When you understand this history and this reality, you look at it and you say, well, yes, we've got a left wing and a right wing, but they're just opposite wings of the same ugly bird. And that bird is called collectivism.
You had better wake up and understand that you have left your government in the hands of other people to take care of things for you because you're too busy with your everyday life. Well, when you leave your personal business and your children and your life in the hands of someone else to take care of you, they're going to take care of you all right. Whatever decisions they make, they're going to take care of themselves, not you. Because you left yourself in their care, they will decide what you will eat. They will decide what you will wear. They will decide if you will have a job or not. Why? Well, because you left yourself in my care. I'm supposed to be in charge of you. So I will decide how much you will make. And you can bet that I'm going to make 1,000 times more than you do. Because I'm in charge. After all, you voted for me.
If you look at how politics is run, and you go into the writings of people like Lenin, for instance, Lenin said there are 1,000 directions and systems in which people could go and live under. But the public mustn't know that. He said it's important that the system that's created for them is accepted by the people so that they think that it's the only system that could possibly work.
Most of us, including myself for certain, in my younger years, I was brought up thinking that you had to choose, if you were smart at least, you would have to choose politically between being on the right or the left. You had to have a political view, and I thought that in those days, I thought that the extreme right would be something like fascism or Nazism, and on the extreme left, of course, you would have communism, or socialism, just a little bit short of that. So that was the paradigm that I was taught, and it seemed to make sense at the time.
And it's true. We're contained in a system of left and rights, supposedly the have-nots against the haves, or those who own the means of production against those who don't, the workers. And that's traditional Labour versus Tory, or Conservative versus Democrat. That's how the system is run. It keeps the public contained within a system of thinking that it must be one or the other, or a middle road in between, which they push. It never occurs to the general public that society has lived in the past under many different types of systems, and as Lenin said, it's important that the public don't know that the system they're born into was designed for them, and that it could be any different. They must think it's the only natural one that could have evolved in their lifetime.
But as I became more involved in these issues and learned more about them, I began to realize that the basic philosophy between the so-called extreme left people, on communists and socialists, and the so-called philosophy on the right of the fascists and the Nazis was really the same. I said, how can this be? They're supposed to be opposites of each other. And then I began to realize that there is something more common to all of these philosophies that was left out of my training and education. And that was the ideology of collectivism. I began to realize that the thing that was common to them all is something called collectivism. Now that's a word that is not very well used. It's not very entrenched in the vocabulary of most people today. But I found out that it was a very commonly used word about a century ago. People wrote a lot about collectivism, and the opposite of that would be individualism. Those are two words that are sort of abandoned today, but in my view, I think they need to be recaptured and understood and used more.
The concept of individuality only came out in about the 1700s. Before that, everybody was either a somebody, that was nobility and royalty, and then you had a middle class of merchants and merchant bankers, a few free men, and then the rest were serfs or peasants. So everyone was lumped in as a mass of their own little clique, and sometimes a big clique like the peasants. And then again, too, ever since the Enlightenment, they went right back to trying to force you all back into the mass man. That's all that Marx talked about, the masses, the masses, the masses.
The whole ideology boils down to a choice between two things. One is individualism, and the other is collectivism. Those words have meaning. Individualism, simply in a general sense, means that the basis of society is the individual. That's the most important element in society. And the purpose of the state is to protect the individual. And the state is the servant of the people. That's individualism. Collectivism, it's the other way around. The collectivists believe that the state or the group is the most important element of society. And the purpose of the people is to serve the state.
The Royal Institute for International Affairs, which has branches in every country in the world, they set up the United Nations. They said in their own writings, from the earliest times to the present, the world they're bringing in is to be a world where everyone who is born, or would be allowed to be born, would be born to serve the state.
They want the idea of the individual and minorities being sacrificed for the greater good of the greater number, which they will define. They will tell you what the greater good for the greater number is, and we're supposed to be mentally defeated by that. Oh, well, if it's for the greater good of the greater number, we cannot object to it. And that's how the game is played. They intend to control us through our own minds, getting us to be willing to be slaves because it's for the greater good for the greater number, you see. So once you buy into that, there is no atrocity that cannot be committed for the greater good or the greater number.
I've been profoundly influenced by the work of Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, who developed a whole philosophy and economic system based on the core ethic of non-aggression. Motivated by having witnessed the ravages of communism and fascism in Europe, he committed his life to finding a just way. He recognized that those systems, as well as socialism and even democracy, wrongly assume the rights of the collective, or the group, to be more important than those of the individual. I had always gone along with the view that more people will thrive if we consider the group's needs above the individual's. But when I took a closer look, I found it doesn't really work that way. In the name of what's best for the group, governments have been responsible for most of the war, death, and destruction on the planet. More than 200 million individuals were killed in the 20th century alone.
From the time we're very young, we're taught to, worship authority basically because that's our key to survival as young children. But as adults, we never go through the rites of passage that tell us how to methodically think for ourselves, and thus we're always in a state of extended adolescence.
Education should aim at destroying free will so that pupils are thus schooled they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Influences of the home are obstructive, and in order to condition students, verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. It is for a future scientist to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen." End quote.
Young people cannot be trusted to form their own opinions. It's our job to tell them.
There is an organized effort in our schools today to indoctrinate our children in internationalism. In other words, belief in the United Nations, and certainly to do the thought that we should do away with national sovereignty. There's an organized effort in our schools today to teach children about collectivism and the importance of socialism and reliance upon government to change our society. There's an organized effort within education to destroy the belief in absolutes in our children and to destroy a belief in God. The purpose of education in America today is not education. It is indoctrination, in internationalism, in collectivism, and in atheism, and they're doing a wonderful job.
Some of them are so arrogant, like Julian Huxley, who was the first CEO of UNESCO. who said that UNESCO's function, by the way, the United Nations Organization for Education worldwide, was to create a standardized system of education across the world so that all children could be manipulated into the same thought patterns, belief patterns, and mentality, basically. A standardization process, a Plato's cave that would all grow up in, never knowing anything outside that cave. He was quite blatant about that. It was for social engineering purposes, not for educational purposes as such.
How do we involve the United States in a war? And they answered, quote, "We must control the diplomatic machinery of the United States by first gaining control of the State Department." Now, don't forget, this is 1910. After the war, the Carnegie Endowment trustees reasoned that if they could get control, here we go, of education in the United States, they would be able to prevent a return to the way of life as it had been prior to the war. And they recruited the Rockefeller Foundation to assist in such a monumental task. According to Dodd, quote, "They divided the task in parts, giving to the Rockefeller Foundation the responsibility of altering education as it pertains to domestic subjects." That was the Southern Education Board they set up. But Carnegie retained the task of altering our education in foreign affairs and about international relations. That would be UNESCO, UN, all that stuff. The foundations decided that the most effective method of achieving this goal would be to alter American history. So they awarded grants, fellowships, and scholarships to those professors and historians who would rewrite American history and promote one worldism, humanism, and socialism.
To them, I'm sure they look at it as a wonderful thing. They see it as an end of nationhood as it has been historically defined. They see that as advantageous, they say, because it'll put an end to war and so forth. And they can sell the idea as a great step toward brotherhood and a unified globe and so forth. They use all of these things to make it sound good. But when you start examining the actual policies that they're instituting, it's not so hot.
We know, for instance, that commutarianism is a term used first by Bush Sr., talking about the collectivist society coming in. The United Nations has us all split up into communities. It's promoted through local TV. Even Sudbury here has your community. This is your local community. Be involved in your community. They're talking about a politically correct community. That's the problem. Government really penetrated and altered and distorted and changed society through communities. Not just with television, which has certainly destroyed the community spirit. The intent of governments, this is how abusers work too. Abusers work with the same technique because they want power over a victim. The abuser will come in and take care initially of problems of the abused. Often the problems are the very outcome of what the abusers have been doing to the victims in the first place. Governments came in with welfare, for instance, a long time ago, in all countries about the same time. At one time, families helped each other out. You didn't need welfare. If someone lost their job, everyone chipped in. You didn't condemn the family member for being unemployed or ill or whatever, or losing their job. Families helped each other. Now, the family, remember, is still really the smallest nucleus of a tribe. And then government came in with unemployment insurance, which they took off you, but nothing was for free. And gradually over time, when people became unemployed or even sick for a while and couldn't work, I heard people even say to their own relatives, well, go to welfare, that's what they're for. There are social agencies to deal with this. Until today, we're in a sad state where even close relatives won't help each other out. They expect the government, the abuser, the government is the abuser. They expect the government to take care of all financial problems for the unfortunate victims. And they stop helping each other out. The family is no longer in the way when government comes for an individual. Each individual will be solely responsible to the government itself, and no family will stand up around them like a primitive tribe and defend them. Because the government's mandate is for control over the victims, not to help the victims. Those who fall under that particular level into the welfare state have their lives run by government agencies and social workers. That's what Huxley says. He says that they won't need their survival capabilities. Russell said the same thing, because the government is taking care and making all their decisions for them. In order to help you, it's really to take you over and have you obeying them and their system.